Hello and welcome back to Monty Dean Show, the Monty Dean Show. I'm going to say the same joke I do every episode. A lot of thought went into that. I've dusted off the old show because a lot of people have been asking what's been happening in the state of Victoria, and I couldn't really put it together that well. So I've got a beautiful guest, Topher Field, to come in and actually be elegant and share information and bring you all up to speed while I do my sort of ham-fisted jokes over the top. So it works out well. Topher, thank you for being here. How are you?
I'm well. Look, I've just been called beautiful and elegant in one introduction. So the check is in the mail, okay? I'll make sure you get paid for that.
I will give back your turtle. Yeah. Would you like to give out where people can find you? Because I usually do that at the end, but I like to do it at the start as well.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm still mostly on the evil social media channels, but I do have my own blog as a backup. So I'm most active on Facebook, Topher Field. So facebook.com/Topher Field. I'm new to Instagram, but that's growing fairly quickly, and I'm getting more active on that at Topher Field. However, the ultimate backup, you get the least information this way, but we have the most security of communication this way. If I get deplatformed off everything else, is to go to my blog, which is topherfield.net, and on the right-hand side, you can put in your email address. That just goes into my list. You'll get a welcome email and a bit of other stuff just to show you some of the stuff I've done recently, and then it'll probably go quiet because I don't really use that very much anymore. But that is my ultimate backup plan for if/when I get that last strike against my Facebook account and they take me off. So Facebook, YouTube, and jump on my blog, topherfield.net.
No, thank you for that. I've done that yesterday, especially because you were famous. You made the papers, as you know, in the 20th century. That was exciting. Now it's like they still make them.
Yeah. No, that's right. It's probably equivalent to a relatively low reach Facebook post.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And in 30 seconds, quickly, who are you? Where did you come from? Because I discovered you, I think at the start of the year, because you were covering the protests and being part of that community. And but we'll get into that later a bit. But yeah, just for anyone who has no idea who you are.
I've been a political commentator for 12 years. I was at one time Australia's most watched independent journalist on YouTube. That was mostly because none of the other ones were there yet. And then once they arrived, I very quickly sank down the rankings. I'm best known for my work on really boring, arcane things like water policy in the Murray-Darling Basin. I did work on the legalization of Uber and the deregulation of the taxi industry. I did work on the proposed News Media Council. I did work on Julia Gillard's Not a Carbon Tax. Like a lot of, I've done work on taxation, etc. Really, really dry, boring stuff. And what I try to do is I go deep into the subject so that my viewers don't have to. I can then figure out, what do my viewers actually need to understand? What's the real story here? What's the actual understanding, where we don't have to get into the nitty gritty, but they come away with a comprehensive enough understanding of what's really going on. Yeah. And that's kind of what I've specialized in for about 12 years. I am a libertarian. Excuse me. I am a libertarian. I've actually won an award that says I'm a libertarian.
Oh, nice.
2015 Libertarian Activist of the Year award from the Australian Libertarian Society. And so I'm a 12-year sort of veteran of all of this. And then when COVID came along, it just blindsided. All my other work stopped. I've been continuing to work on the Murray-Darling Basin issues because I think it's one of the biggest and most serious issues facing our country at the moment. And COVID just took over from everything. I couldn't get oxygen for anything else. And then, of course, COVID slowly just became more and more absurd, and the violations of our rights became more and more sort of in your face. And I began, it was actually in March of 2020, so very early in the whole nonsense, I released my first video on the subject. I spoke at my first protest, which was actually the first protest that I know of against lockdowns on April 25th, 2020.
Yes. I think I watched that. Yeah, I'll even back then. See, 2020 is the year at a time, and I can't remember. I have a Monday today, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So that's the like level of it. Yeah. I'm for people that, because you'll be sharing this video clearly, so I'll be new to people as well. Yep. I'm from the spiritual comedy conspiracy world, so it's a niche of a niche of a niche. And so coming from the conspiracy world, you could sort of see what happened in March of 2020, where like half the conspiracy theorists are like, oh shit, it's real. They started freaking out.
Well, it's interesting because I don't come from the conspiracy world at all myself, and I'm generally one of the people pouring water on a lot of these sort of people who just get really exercised about this sort of stuff. But the last year and a half has been really challenging for me because of how many times the conspiracy theorists have turned out to be right. Exactly. And so I'm having a bit of a hard time dealing with that. And I still think, there's a lot of stuff where people just take things and run with them way too far. And I get concerned about some people because I think there are some mental health implications to people who really run with this stuff a long way. They end up creating a lot of psychological pressure for themselves with things that they can't control. Even if they were correct, there's nothing they could do about it. It's not a helpful thing for, and everyone's different, but I definitely see some people who I think just run way too deep into this stuff and really end up doing themselves harm. However, I have to acknowledge that there were things that I dismissed. I was one of the people that dismissed the lab leak theory, for example. It just seemed like an unnecessary bit of noise, an unnecessary distraction. And then, hey presto, all of a sudden the media turned on a dime. The new information, or actually not new information, but the information that was being poo-pooed earlier on suddenly became accepted. And now everyone thinks that that's the way it works. So I have to put my hand up and say, well done, conspiracy theorists, on some things. But at the same time, I'm going to continue to say, just maybe put the brakes on a little bit on some of the other stuff.
Well, that's what I as I said, I'm in the green room, a comedy show with Andrew Bartzis, galactic historian. He can tap into the Akashic records, so the high woo aspect. But we spend 2 hours just taking the piss out of everything, and it's like light work at salad, or a saying that he coined that I use, and you can use it as well, because I think you've, in a similar way, you've made the same example of where at the lockdowns, when you're trying to not convert but show people the information, it's about your rights have been eroded. You don't open with, and this is the quote, baby raping lizard wizards. You don't open with that. It's like, what?
And this was one of the challenges that we had was people wanting to cram every single message into every single protest. And the reality is, and this has been my craft, my specialty for the last 12 years, is trying to take people and actually move them from where they are closer to where I believe they ought to be. There's no point. I mean, there are some people who have massive audiences on the internet, and they've gathered these massive audiences by bringing absolutely no value. They simply tell people what they want to hear. And that's very attractive. That will build you an audience very, very quickly. But in my opinion, has very little value. You're not adding much value to society at all if that's all you're doing. So my objective has always been to actually try and influence people's thinking, which then attracts a much smaller audience because most people don't want to have to think. But the very first step, if you want to change someone's opinion, is you have to meet them where they're at and then walk with them from there. Okay. If you stand over here shouting at them, they're not going to move. They're not going to walk towards you. But if you come to them, you say, hey, here's this tiny sliver of common ground that I've found. Something that we can agree on, something that we at least can have an adult conversation about. Now walk with me as we talk, and people can then be influenced.
I'm similar as well. I don't open with, we're on an energy farm on the planet and we can't leave. It's more of, do you know the corruption in the financial sector? And you just start with there, like the Fed, just the Federal Reserve. When you find out, wait, that's a private company. It's like, yes, and you just pause because you can
see money has no value.
Well, it does because we believe it does, which is fascinating. Yes. And it's an energy exchange anyway, but it's corrupted and blah blah blah. And well, you know about taxation.
It's just sadly more than I would like to.
So taxation is theft is more than a meme.
Taxation is not theft. I will defend it. Taxation is extortion.
Okay, not theft. Okay.
Inflation is theft.
Yes. Okay. I like
taxation is extortion.
Speaking of big words that usually don't get spoken about in let's go with coercion. So let's start with because we're in lockdown 6. Because
I've lost count. I ran out of fingers.
Well, I ran out of Die Hard movies because lockdown harder, lockdown with a vengeance, and they got to 6. It was like,
lockdown with a vengeance. I like it. I hadn't thought of it like that.
So I moved on to Star Wars movies, and so it's Return of the Lockdown, which is Return of the Jedi. I've got a feeling that we're going to get to lockdown 10, but we'll get into that in a bit. So I'll sort of set it up. 2 days before we went into lockdown, our fearless leader, Dictator Dan. He has so many nicknames, and for those who don't live in Victoria, we have to see his ugly mug and his presentation style he did 100 days in a row of press conferences,
something like that. Yeah,
and it was like, just nails on a blackboard. No, that's enjoyable compared to watching. Just want to pick him up by the ears and what they call double donut day. I'm like, who's the marketing people at these? But that means 0 cases and 0 deaths. 40 less than 48 hours. They announced we're going into lockdown in 3 hours.
Yeah.
And so I'll hand it over to, because did you make it to that Flinders Street Station protest that day?
Did I make it to that one?
Or is that
the other day, or on that day?
I
don't think I did. I made it to the snap protest for the lockdown number 5.
Okay, yep.
But I live an hour out of the city, and I'm the primary carer for our kids. So unfortunately, there's a lot of this stuff that happens, I was at, or basically every single one, when they were being planned well in advance, and I knew the date and I could organize things. And now that things are happening much more spur of the moment, I'm getting to some, but I'm like you guys, I'm spectating others. I just can't do them all. Anyway, let me rewind just a fraction for those that may not quite be sort of across just how significant things have been here in Melbourne. We now have the dubious honor of having the longest and most extended and deepest lockdowns of anywhere on planet Earth. It's basically, we are the most locked down, and the only place that can claim to be more locked down than we are is North Korea. And that's kind of it. And it wasn't COVID in their case, but we are the most locked down place in the world from a COVID point of view. It all started in March of 2020. They said 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and lots of people, myself included, went along with that. Now,
if I may, that was just basically because they believed the medical system would be swamped and be overrun, which they're still doing today. But I'll please continue.
Well, and then they took $1 billion to then increase our emergency room capacity by 4,000 beds. The money's gone, but the beds haven't materialized. So,
but they do have a nice shiny tank.
They've had that for a few years. That wasn't just 1 whatever billion. So they bought that with other money. But 2 weeks to flatten the curve. And back then we were being told, don't wear a mask. It's a waste of a mask. And then of course that changed shortly afterwards. But we were being told to social distance, and shops had their capacities reduced, and some types of shops were shut down and so forth. And by and large, the Victorian population went along with it because it was 2 weeks. There was at least a logic behind it. There was, we're protecting hospital capacity. There's at least a logic there, right? I didn't like it. I didn't think it was appropriate. I didn't think it was proportional, but there's a logic there. So I went along with it, as did many, many people. And then, of course, before that 2 weeks was over, the narrative had already shifted. It was no longer about protecting the hospital system capacity. It was now about getting back to zero, COVID zero, which then continued to be our mantra up until only about a month ago, where they finally walked back, actually probably less, about 3 weeks ago. They finally walked back from this COVID zero madness. And in the intervening time, we've had now, it's been well over 500 days that have passed. We've had well over 250 something days in lockdown in that time. Of varying degrees. The rules keep changing. And that's one of the infuriating things, is that the rules are changing. At one time there, it felt like they were changing almost daily, and they're very detailed and very arcane sort of rules. If you're this type of shop and this type of other thing is going on, then you can allow that many people. But if the other thing's going on, then you can only allow this many people. And everyone's trying to make sense of it. It's changing every day. The police are always out of date enforcing rules that don't apply anymore, or over enforcing rules.
Actually had a joke was where you're not allowed to meet your family at your house, but you can go to a brothel and hang out with them.
So
the ridiculous of it. And skipped ahead to we're closing down playgrounds for children. Like what was the insanity? So I don't want to jump around too much because I know you're on the flow.
Okay, so I'll fast forward through a lot of that was the state of affairs. So myself and a number of others would show up to protests around about once to twice a month. We would try to maintain a tempo that was sustainable. And there were other people organizing these protests, and a lot of mistakes were made early on. I mean, none of us, myself, none of these other people have ever been involved in an illegal protest movement before. We're not like full-time professional protesters. So a lot of mistakes were made, but lessons were learned and things improved, and we started to have some really effective protests. But in the meantime, the police violence started to ramp up, and we went from the police trying to disperse the crowd to now the police running in and making arrests and trying to kettle the crowd so the crowd can't leave. Think about the irony of, it's COVID. We need you to all socially distance and everything else. But if you come out to protest against all the rules, then we're going to kettle you and cram you in as closely as possible to each other and to the police for hours on end so that we can pluck you out one at a time and get your details and give you fines and things. So, and the other thing to keep in mind is Melbourne had a Black Lives Matter rally at a time when protest was illegal. They had a Black Lives Matter rally, over 10,000 people, and they just gave a couple of token fines to the people who organized the rally. That was it. The police stood back, never interfered, never intervened. It was on Saturday, I think it was around about the 25th, 26th, whatever it was, of August. I think it was late in August. What's a Saturday? 22nd it must have been. And that is the first time that rubber bullets finally got used on us. And a guy called
Matt was in the city, wasn't it?
That was in the city. A guy called Matt Lawson got shot. The irony being, Matt Lawson is an incredibly calm, incredibly level-headed man, and his self-appointed role in these, because there's no ruler, there's no leader. You just go in and you do your thing. He was trying to defuse tensions. He was often talking people in the protest down from their level of angst and getting them just to calm it down a little bit. And he'd been speaking to police officers at various points in time and making sure that they understood that some people had chosen to bring children to the protests, and there are children in the crowd. Let's just be calm. He saw the officer with the rubber bullet gun, and it's all on video. He walked forward saying, "What is that? You're not going to shoot that." And the guy lit him up. And he became the first person to get shot with a rubber bullet. And since then, rubber bullets have basically just become in some cases, literally their first resort, not their last resort.
Yeah, I was actually.
So we'll get to the tank in a minute. But you asked about the playgrounds. This was the first, in my opinion, big mistake that the psychopath that the psychopath Daniel Andrews, who has managed to get himself into the seat of power in Victoria, made. He's played his cards very, very cleverly, and like a true psychopath, he's a very intelligent man. He just lacks empathy, and he lacks the ability to actually care about anybody but himself. And he divided people and played people brilliantly right up until this playground lockdown. And the support for lockdowns in 2 weeks went from 56% to 44%. He lost 12 percentage points of his support for lockdowns in 2 weeks because he did a blanket ban on all of the playgrounds. And a lot of people then started to go, hang on, where's the science for this? Children are unlikely to contract COVID. If they do contract it, it tends to be mild, and they are very unlikely to pass it on. And there has been no recorded example of outdoor transmission in Australia. So shutting down children's playgrounds makes no sense at all at multiple levels. And yet, when you've also shut down people's schools, their sports, they're not allowed to visit family, and they're not allowed to visit friends. Playgrounds became one of the last things that parents had to be able to actually look after their own sanity and the mental and physical well-being of their kids.
Yeah, the mental illness is through the roof. And there are children, I've seen video, it's half cute, half sad. A toddler going around and using everything as a sanitizer thing. She would tap on it and oh, look, that's cute. But then you realize
psychological damage. Psychological damage that's being done to our kids. And I've been banging on about this now for a couple of months, that we are being forced by the government to choose between being a good citizen or being a good parent, because you can't be both anymore. And we all have to make that decision.
If I get I think a good disclaimer of where we stand, because I mean, I was talking to a friend who was like, don't open with a bombastic theory from the conspiracy world is that COVID is a time-traveling karma resolution disease. You don't open with that. But the thing is, there is a disease out there. I mean, most of it could be influenza and cold, but the point is, it's not about health, it's about control and everything else. And so the response, I'm sure you said it before, the response to what's happening is out of proportion.
Completely out of proportion.
That's basically where we're coming from.
That's a good point. There'll be plenty of people that watch this that don't know me and don't know any of my work. So let me lay out real quick where I stand on this. Is there such a thing as COVID-19? There is something out there that's killing more people than average. All right. All you have to do is look at the all-cause mortality statistics around the world, and you will see that when 2020 winter flu season hit, it was a bad one. You can see the spike in all-cause mortality. Now, we can argue about whether the number of deaths is correct, whether they've over-attributed to COVID-19, whether the PCR tests are actually effective at detecting whatever this thing is. We can argue about a lot of the details. But one thing that I think is patently clear from the data, which I would consider the all-cause mortality data to be among the most reliable that we can get. There's very little subjectivity, and I really don't think that countries are running around fudging that data and making up a whole bunch of extra dead people, right? I would consider personally the all-cause mortality data is pretty reliable and pretty indicative. And something is happening.
Yes.
Something was causing something. Now, we very quickly learn, well, there's two things to know. Number one, in the early days of any pandemic, the numbers will always look worse than they actually turn out to be. And there's good reasons for that. It doesn't have to be people wanting to manipulate the data. The simple fact is, at first, no one knows there's anything. And then someone notices, hey, there's some people getting sick in this really particular way, or there's people dropping dead in larger numbers, or they notice something.
Yeah.
And the reaction begins at that point. And who are they testing to find out if they have the disease? The people that are presenting to hospital. There's no widespread testing yet. There's no finding asymptomatic cases yet. There's none of that.
Yeah.
So early on, very early in the pandemic, when they're saying, oh, this looks like it has a fatality rate of 30% or 12% or whatever it might have been, that's the nature of the very early days of any new disease. Who's being tested for the disease? The people that are already super sick, the people that are the most likely to die. And we know that that number will only get better as time goes on, because testing will widen out. We'll discover a lot more people had it than we thought, etc. So the early data was really scary, but the early data is always going to be scary. And so this is now sort of January, February, we're getting these ridiculous stories of people dropping dead in the streets of Wuhan. Well, that never happened. And we know that never happened because it's never happened anywhere else in the world.
Well, yeah. Also, is anyone going to really believe the Chinese government and their media? So it is.
Correct.
I mean,
Correct.
I don't really stray into politics that much. I make fun of it, but I have a strong political view on China. They suck. Back to you.
Yeah. So by the middle of March 2020 was when the first actually decent data began to come out. And the particularly seminal report came out by a bloke by the name of John Ioannidis. Now, he's not just any old epidemiologist. He literally wrote the book on the statistics of epidemiology. All the other epidemiologists learned from him and his book. He literally wrote the book that they read to learn. Okay. So when he comes out with a report, and he says, our best estimate at the moment is that the actual infection fatality rate is somewhere around about 0.2 to 0.3%. In March 2020, you have to say this is the world's greatest mind on this issue. And this is his actual estimate based on all of the data. It was a meta-analysis of all the data that he could get from all over the world. Well, guess what? The official infection, not the case fatality rate, the official global infection fatality rate is now, according to the World Health Organization.
The same?
Approximately 0.26%, right in the middle of his range.
Yeah. Now, and this is a month after, is it the London Institute, or there was that thing that went out like...
The Imperial College of London. So Neil Ferguson was the charlatan. I'm not going to dishonor other academics by calling him an academic. That's an absolute insult to everybody else. He is the charlatan who wrote that report. Now, I call him a charlatan not to be mean, but because he has a long history of massively overestimating the danger of infectious diseases. He predicted between hundreds of thousands and millions dead from a whole host of different diseases, from SARS to MERS to mad cow disease and all sorts of other ones in between. His apocalyptic predictions are incredibly predictable. Ironically, you can predict that his prediction is going to be apocalyptic, and they have never once come true. So he then came out with an apocalyptic prediction as to what was going to happen in England. Because remember, early on, England were not buying into the whole lockdown stuff. They were taking a similar path to Sweden early on. And then all of a sudden, this report came out and scared the government into locking down and doing what the rest of the world had done. That report adds to Neil Ferguson's appalling record. And the fact that he did lose his job because he was breaking quarantine in order to have an affair with a married woman.
Yes, that's right.
I was about to say the fact that he still has his job is appalling. He doesn't have his job, but the fact that he's not in prison for malpractice and for the harm that he has caused to the British people as a result of his malpractice, I think is an absolute disgrace.
Because I get the feeling that governments today are still using that as their benchmark.
It seems like some of them have not advanced their knowledge or their data beyond about February of 2020. It's as though we've learned nothing new in that time. And I would say Victoria is an example of that.
Oh, yeah. Just because we're Australians, bloody oath. And it's like you've got people across the planet going, the fucking what? It's like, aren't you Australian? You're lovely. But then we'll only talk about Victoria. New South Wales, that is a totally different show.
Sure.
For us and them, because it's just ridiculous. Well, I'll just mention one. Today, apparently, the unvaccinated will get freedoms on the 1st of December.
If there's 80% of the population double jabbed.
Yeah, 80 or 90 or whatever. Yeah, it's
80% double jabbed.
Yeah, it's coercion. So that's the point. Anyway, so
let me get back to the timeline, because we never got to the armored vehicle driving down the street.
What a week. I mean, it started out with that submarine thing, and that was apparently the least worst. I know. I did connect it all though because of China and Dan Andrews and blah blah blah.
And now the French are pissed off with us.
Yeah. So where we're in time, where the lockdown started, 3 hours notice, which is fascinating.
Yep.
And then was now if you weren't at that rally, I think that's when I do apologize, I can't remember her name, she was arrested. I think that was that one.
No, she got grabbed at that one.
Okay.
She got grabbed at that one and then released.
Yeah.
And we all thought for a little while that she had been arrested. So I was actually here and I was trying to broadcast, and I was bringing in other people's live feeds into my little broadcasting software and then putting it out there and trying to get live sort of reports from people who could tell us what was going on, etc. So I was as in the dark as anybody else. And we got word that she'd been grabbed, and then I found her live streaming about 20 minutes later. And so she was still free. They did arrest her while she was driving a little while later. So we can talk about Monica Schmidt. She's now free again.
Oh, good.
And she was originally, we were going to be having a chat on my Facebook page tonight, but we've had to postpone that a little bit. But let's walk through this step by step. So number 6 was announced. There was curfews. There were only 4 reasons to leave your house, 1 hour of exercise, no friends for your kids, no school for your kids, no organized sport for your kids, no family visits unless they actually already lived in your own home for your kids. So this is government mandated child abuse and a total abuse, shutting down all the shops, etc. The number of human rights violations wrapped up in these lockdowns is astonishing.
Oh, sorry. I've got a comic book character called Captain Pedantic.
Oh, yes.
Guess what I do? 5, to get vaccinated.
You're right. They did add that. So the 4th was there for ages, and then the vaccine came along, and they've said now you're allowed to leave the house to do that.
Yeah. And so was that the 5 kilometer radius?
That was 5 kilometers, which they've done before, and they reintroduced that again.
Yes.
And so we had another protest organized for 2 Saturdays ago. And so we went ahead with that particular protest.
Hang on, because it was supposed to be 4 weeks, and then I think 2 weeks in they stretched it out or something. It's all a blur.
They keep on fiddling with it all the time, and you can never trust them to actually do what they've said they're going to do. They can't keep their word. So we held that protest on the Saturday, and things were really sketchy. The protest organizers were really clever in how they put the protest together. We were able to get a critical mass together, a couple of thousand people, and we started marching. One of the things that the media consistently gets wrong is that they say that we're the ones who are there for violence. I then actually went through, so I live streamed that entire protest, and then I went through and I did a chat where I broke it down and I showed people my footage from the day and commentated and showed people where we were and what was going on. And I can prove to you beyond a shadow of doubt, we consistently walk away from the cops. We consistently walk away from confrontation.
That's where you had the first clash up near Parliament House, where they had the spray, and that was that protest, wasn't it?
No, different protest. So we never went anywhere near Parliament House.
Because there was a protest in the city where they're moving, which they're there for a fight. Then why did protesters constantly see cops and walk the other way?
So that was the protest before this one, and that's the one where Matt Lawson got shot.
Oh, right. Yes, of course. Yeah. Because so I just want to mention the Ring of Steel.
Yeah.
Because they what, $500,000, and you guys just gone, oh, we'll go to Richmond then.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. So we simply set up and set our organizing, our meeting point outside of that Ring of Steel, and then we marched away from the cops. Because we're not there for a fight. We're there to make a point. We're there to exercise our human right to protest because we're not happy with what our government is doing.
After 18 months,
After 18 months. Now, I spoke at my very first protest in April of 2020. There were 70 of us there. We caused absolutely no trouble. When the government gets pissed at people for causing trouble now, the only answer they should be getting from journalists and from the public is, well, why the hell didn't you listen 18 months ago when they weren't causing trouble? Then, if you ignore someone when they whisper, they speak. If you ignore them when they speak, they shout. If you ignore them when they shout, guess what you're going to get, right? And that's where we are now.
Did you see? Oh, go ahead.
So at this particular protest, we got kettled the first time and then managed to escape through a large gate that a resident opened so that we could slip through
the mean streets of Richmond.
In the mean streets of Richmond, that's right. And then we marched away from the cops again and minded our own business. And then the cops kettled us. We went through a location that wasn't the best idea.
I know exactly where that is because my family is very transport orientated, trams and buses. You walk past Q Depot, the tram depot there. And for those who know, and because I've got a large American audience, I keep befuddling them with local references. You crossed the Yarra River and you entered sort of Hawthorne Q area.
Correct.
Went around and you're heading back towards Richmond.
Correct.
And it was through I'm not sure how tall it is, but it's a cutting, and it's like
tall.
It's like a box canyon, but it's like the Grand Canyon type thing. And the police knew what they're doing in that respect, because it's a choke point, and they near the bridge they set up a line, and that's when I think that's when that woman was knocked over and sprayed in the face.
I can tell you exactly what happened with all of that.
Yeah.
So we were marching. The other thing, it's like a box canyon, and there's obviously only a narrow entrance at each end. And the other thing is there's a slight hump in it. So as you enter at one end, you can't see the ground at the other end.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
The cops were actually out of our sight until we'd already marched into that. And you can see me on my video. I was live streaming. I'm like, I'm not a big fan of this idea, but hopefully we'll get through and get across the bridge. And then sure enough, the cops were waiting for us.
Yeah, I remember you saying that. Yeah.
But what can you do? Like there's no one organizer, no one's in charge. And so the crowd kind of makes its own decisions dynamically. And that's where we ended up. So then they stopped us down the bottom and they had cops walking along behind us and they stopped us up the top. And we all kind of settled in to be kettled and to be arrested and to be fined and to probably be touched up a little bit by a couple of overly aggressive cops because they like to do that along the way. They'll pick off a few people, they'll pick the big guys, hit them a few times, rough them up, and drag them away, and then that way no one else gives them any trouble. Sort of that seems to be the mentality. Because they don't get charged with assault, even if they assault you with deadly weapons, it never seems to actually be a problem for them. Well, the crowd had other ideas, and what happened was the group of police that had been walking behind us was smaller than the group of police that had blocked us. And a bunch of the guys were just like, we're pushing through.
I call it the Braveheart moment.
And we've had a few of those along the way. There's been a few times when protesters have broken through police lines, but it's never the way the media like to portray it. Is they pretend like we've marched up to a police line and then decided to keep going. That's how they like to pretend it worked. They never show the wide shot that shows that the police have boxed us in on every single side. So either we're going to sit there and get beaten up and get fined and arrested for exercising our human rights, or we're going to push our way through. That's the actual option. We don't have that only happens once I've taken away the option of peacefully walking the other direction.
And just remembered as well, because there's so much. The day before, if you remember, the construction workers had their own lunch break protest because they unfortunately they're common rooms, I think, not tea rooms. Now, and I read basically there's a reason why they have those. It's because when you're on a massive site, everywhere it's basically danger. If you're in that room, it's a safety issue. And so, do you want 400 construction workers all around the site or on the street with COVID and everything else like that? So that's when they noticed the police did nothing on that day. It's like, oh, geez, he's a bit big. We'll just let them have lunch. For those who didn't see the footage, they brought out tables and sat in the middle of the road, stopping trams and traffic.
Brilliant way to protest.
And then on the Saturday, we've just been talking about it where
we had our pre-organized protest. So we broke through that police line, and I was actually part of that running of the bulls, I called it, because it was just this crazy sort of situation where we pushed through that police line. And it was immediately after that, what happened was the senior sergeant, who I'm informed by my friends who are police officers or ex-police officers, would have been the individual in charge of that whole situation. So that line that blocked us had a senior sergeant in it who was the guy in charge. All of a sudden, we break through the line at the other end, and from his perspective, standing there, he goes from having all of us trapped to all of a sudden, it's like the sea parting, was just all the water's gone, all the people are gone.
Ghost town. Right? Full.
And there's one woman and one photographer, an age photographer, is there supporting a woman who we've now marched for kilometers. We've been on our feet for over an hour. We've already been kettled once. She was 70 years old, and she clearly gave up walking. And she stood there thinking that the police would grab her, take her away, write her a fine, whatever it might be, and that would be that. Instead, the senior sergeant walks up to her, shoves her with both hands. Her feet come off the ground, such is the force of the shove. Yep. She goes down and her head gets that whip effect onto the concrete. Then the senior sergeant, along with another police officer, bend over and pepper spray her in the eyes while she's lying on the ground, having just smashed her head as a result of being pushed by him. And then they keep walking like the complete psychopaths they are, as if nothing happened.
Yep. That's the footage that's gone around the world.
Correct.
One of them, yeah.
I wanted to spell a number of myths here because there are people saying it was a setup, it was a 34-year-old man, there was a wig, blah, blah, blah. It took a little while for me to get all of the information and to put it all together. I am now certain that this is what happened. There is a woman. She goes to a Macedonian church along with one of my followers who has filled me in with some of this information, and then others have come from photographs and other eyewitness accounts. She is approximately 70 years old. She was at the protest. She's a red-headed, curly-headed woman. She was concerned about being identified, and so she brought this bulky overcoat and she brought a black wig so that she would not be identified. And when things got intense, she put the wig on.
Yes.
Then when she got shoved over, the wig did get knocked off and it lay on the road beside her. However, there was a photograph from a very low angle where you can't see much of her face, and they claimed that it was a 34-year-old man. That is a complete lie, and was a complete lie put out there by people who want to defend the violence from the police officers.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll get into that where the Victorian, half the Victorian publics are cheering them on. It's like, I know you can disagree with the protesters for what they're doing, but how can you justify? Yeah, but how can you justify the police brutality? And that's what's going overseas. They're just seeing the police brutality. They're actually saying in the United States, certain people, let's not get how did they say? Let's not have America turn into Australia. So that's the example they're using.
100%. We have now there is a series of children's books that I'll be talking about on my Facebook channel tonight. Instead of interviewing Monica when she's not available, I've been wanting to do this for a while. There's a set of children's books called the Tuttle Twins that I love. And I bought actually 2 copies of the whole set because I knew that we'd wear them out. And I read them to my kids, and they're fantastic books all about economics, all about freedom. They're basically the closest thing to libertarian children's books that you can get, but they're really high quality, really well written, really nicely illustrated. They've just released the 12th book in the series, and Victoria is the cautionary tale in that book, warning these kids about what can happen if you let the government get too much power. Right. I'm proud and sad to which we're being talked about.
I'm proud and sad at the same time.
It's not a crowning achievement that we wanted. Now, after that Saturday protest, so that was the 3rd protest in a row where we embarrassed Victoria Police, because each time they escalated their tactics, and each time we were still able to get a critical mass together and have a successful protest. Now, on the Monday, all of a sudden, everything took a massive twist because the unions suddenly were having this massive street fight, basically, with their own union leadership who was selling them out. And the union members did not want to be forced to have the vaccination, and they didn't want to be forced to have to pick and choose which jobs they could take based on their vac status.
This is where I discovered Rukshan.
Yes,
because I'm like, okay, I've seen him do blah blah blah. Oh, he's at this rally, and it was the members having a problem with. So the police sort of stood back. Then things got way out of hand. So it is all filmed as well. So
it's all there. And Rukshan, Rukshan. He's a god among men. I mean, the man, people literally chant his name.
Yes.
All right. I'm not even making that up.
He is popular overseas. He's getting over 50,000. It's not all Australians. There are people from Chicago and New York and everywhere wondering why, and because it's of our networks, like with your followers and people that listen to me and stuff like that. So,
and he at times on his live streams, when he's just showing you what happens, he's just pointing the camera and just letting you see what's happening at these protests. He at times has peaked at over 100,000 viewers. Our mainstream news channels are typically between 2,000 and 4,000. So one independent media journalist is literally getting 20 times, 30 times the reach of our so-called mainstream media.
So the hit pieces came out on the weekend, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. So he was there on Monday because he's done the hard work already, and he was wondering what's going on. And I'll let you'll be able to edit down the timeline. Can we say Yahtzees?
Look, It all gets a bit surreal because all of a sudden, this was not the experienced group of protest organizers that had learned lessons over the last 18 months.
Yes.
These were unionists who were generally younger, very angry, and rightly angry, both at the government for what the government was doing, but also their union leadership for selling them out.
Yeah.
But they didn't have any experience or any sort of strategic nous whatsoever. So they just went for straight normal union tactics. If you don't like something, you punch somebody in the mouth, kick down a door, you break the glass. They're chanting every day. And I'm sitting there. So I wasn't there. I was watching it. I was watching Rukshan's coverage the same as everybody else. And I'm just sitting there going, you guys have no idea what you're saying. It's great. You can turn up every day to a picket line, turning up every day to get shot at by the cops.
Yeah,
you're not going to do that every day for very many days.
You're not French, you're Australian.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So anyway, it went into a second day and it went into a third day, and I joined in on the third day. And the third day is when things, I think, everything was already so surreal and so far out of hand, but this has so far been the pinnacle of the absurdity for me. On the Wednesday morning, after 2 days of these tradie protests, of these union protests, Daniel Andrews, the psychopath in charge of our state, gets on the TV and says, we're going to roll out new gear and new tactics. You'd better not come into the city to protest.
Yeah, after an earthquake as well.
Oh, there's an earthquake.
There's so many jokes. Like when after the union office was destroyed, so like, I've got a small job, cash offer. We need the construction. And then like conspiracy world of like, well, earthquake, is it? Because it's rare that we have an earthquake. And so that's a different conversation. Yeah, but the thing is, it's there's joke. People instantly went joking. Well, isn't it a shame they stood down all the construction workers?
Yeah, that's right. You could repair the damage.
And then see, my mind is so full of jokes and stupidity. You have the police commissioner basically coming out. Yeah, we've got new tactics, as well as Dan Andrews. On a sidestep, just very quickly, the chief health officer said these people are wacky. They think they'll get better after ingesting horse paste. And it's like, dude, it won the Nobel Health Peace Prize in 2015. And it's been used since the 60s. Yeah,
no one is saying that we should take the veterinary version of it. We just want access to the human version of it. Thank you very much.
And so I'll stop here because I know there's so many times where it's like, hang on, aren't you supposed to be knowledgeable? Why are you in charge? I remember, you got the commission, is it deputy commissioner, the next one down?
Assistant commissioner or deputy commissioner, I can't remember which.
These protesters, and apparently the sovereignty movement, whatever that is, like, dude, 30 seconds, Google, just find out what it is. It's not that hard. So I'll stop there.
And this is the thing, they identify one person in the crowd and they go, we know that he's a right-wing nut job, okay, and maybe he is, but then they say, right, the whole crowd's just full of right-wing nut jobs. And then you've got Rukshan, and this is why they hate Rukshan, and the hit jobs have come out against him. He's interviewing these people. There's this group of people standing there with the
turbans,
Sikh turbans around their heads, and he goes over to them and says, "Oh, hi guys, where are you from?" And they're, we're from Punjab, in India, and we're Sikhs, and so why are you here? Well, we don't want to be forced to take the vaccination. Then he walks up to another group of people, and they'll be from Croatia, another group of people, and they're from wherever else. And I actually saw, and this is how deep down the rabbit hole we are. I saw someone criticizing Rukshan with a comment on one of his live streams saying, why are you only interviewing ethnic people when we know that this is a right-wing neo-Nazi rally?
Yeah.
I'm like, you are literally seeing him just walk up to the next person and then the next person and the next random person, right? And he's just talking to anybody that will talk to him. But you are so sure that what the media told you was right that you are literally saying, I will not believe my eyes.
Yeah, there's no evidence of, because when you're reading this stuff, I so want to post back, are the Nazis in the room with us now?
That's right. That's right.
Now, it's because we're critical thinkers. Yes, there is neo-Nazis out there. All four of them. But the thing is, it's like, how can you say, that's John Sector, one of the union bosses. Well, this is before they broke in. He was, when the I'll come out, talk to you. All right, cool. Give me an hour and I'll come back out. During that hour, he's talking to 3AW,
which is a radio station for those who aren't.
Yeah, local radio, local talk radio station. Been around for years. My grandfather used to listen to it in the 80s a lot. It's cool if it's your cup of tea.
Yeah.
But that's when he said, there's hardly any members here. It's all these professional protesters, right-wing, alt-right, neo-Nazis. Yeah. And someone was listening to 3AW, told a friend at the protest, and you wonder why they got extremely agitated and cranky and went nuts. And then that came out as well. And also on that Monday, you're all neo-Nazis, and the government goes, oh, well, we're losing control. We'll shut down the construction industry for 2 weeks. Now, every construction worker has nothing to do. So guess what they'll do tomorrow? Yeah, they went to the protest.
Okay, so Wednesday morning, out comes the Premier, out comes the police commissioner saying new tactics, new equipment, don't come into the city, don't protest. Now, if there's one time that you need to exercise your human rights, it's when your government is telling you you don't need to exercise your human rights.
Yeah.
Right, it's as simple as that, right? Even if you had no issue with the vaccine, the moment the government comes out and says you're not allowed to protest, every single person that understands what human rights are should be on the streets.
Yeah.
Immediately, right? That's all the reason you need.
Well, but on top of that, is they won't listen to you. That's the other thing of like Daniel Andrews says, I don't even know what they're protesting. And you've seen the footage where the reporter says, you. It's like, how out of touch are you?
Yeah. And then his answer, he says, well, that's their right, but da-da-da-da.
Yeah.
It's like, well, hang on. You're not treating it like that's our right. And that's the problem. That's why it's getting as rough as it is.
And there's no conversation. I mean, there's a divide in society, different conversation. I think we've got about 4 shows booked now with you. Just
to cover all this different stuff.
But it's not helping the divide. And yeah, we'll get to the shrine. And so he's out of touch. He's trying to control, and just the normal control freak psychopath is like, oh, you're not listening to me. And yet we get called children because we want to actually have
an adult conversation.
Yeah. I posted underneath, I think it was a 9 network thing about, anti-vaxxer protest. And I just typed underneath, you spelt pro-choice wrong.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. It's anti-mandatory vaccination, and that word mandatory is very, very important in that. There are many people coming to the protest who have been vaccinated. There are many people who plan to be vaccinated, but they are absolutely against the violation of human rights that comes with segregating society based on medical choices. That's what this is about. So when protesters went into the city, regardless of the warnings on the Wednesday, we saw that the new tactics and the new equipment that we'd all been warned about was that the Victorian government rolled out its anti-terror squad. Now, you remember after 9/11, they brought in all this new legislation giving new equipment and new powers to the police for anti-terrorism laws. We're going to keep you safe, right?
Yeah.
Well, in Australia, thankfully, that has been barely used. There have been very few incidents in Australia.
I think Martin Plaza in Sydney is one.
Yeah, and then Gaga Soulis, who drove down Burke Street in Melbourne and killed a lot of people. Is people argue about whether that was a terrorist attack or not, but I would.
There's terror involved. It's the same category. Yeah, nut job with a car killing. It's still terrifying. Yes. Yeah.
But they had bought a new piece of equipment called a Bearcat, which is an armored personnel carrier. It's something that would not at all look out of place. If you change the paint scheme and drove it down the streets of Kabul in Afghanistan, you go, oh, yeah, there you go.
It's probably where it came from.
Yeah, quite possibly. And so they bought one of those for the anti-terror squad in, I believe it was 2018, and it had never been used. And finally, this was their chance to use it. So protesters start to get into the city. No central location had been announced, because remember, the unions have come in now. It's no longer any of the organizers that learned all the lessons. It's the unions. Just they're angry, and they're saying every day, and well, where? I don't know. When? I don't know. We'll just get into the city and do something. So then this Bearcat, with a whole bunch of special operations group or anti-terror squad or whatever particular unit they were, I'm not 100% sure, armed with rubber bullets, walking behind the Bearcat drives down the street, and some of them are actually hanging off the Bearcat, shooting at unarmed civilians who looked like they might have been protesters. At this point, I want to emphasize this. There was no massive protest going on. There was no looting. There wasn't even graffiti going on. There were people milling around in the city.
Yeah, there's no rioting, no protest.
Shooting at them with rubber bullets because they thought that maybe that particular person that they were now using potentially deadly force on might have been a protester.
Now, you would have seen the exhibition buildings. I was watching live. I can't remember the gentleman's last name, Anthony. He was arrested at Northcote. He was arrested live stream. Yeah. And Channel 9, the familiar faces are like, they just added him because he was there. Yeah. But he was in a small group. They're trying to find somewhere, and they're walking away from the cops. And they get to, I think it's Rathdown Street, if I'm correct, on the west side of the Gardens. And they see the riot squad coming up from the corner. And so they go into the park. And the cops just get out of all their vans, start advancing and firing without warning. And that's when you see everyone. It was basically a hunt. It wasn't protesting or anything. And so that's when they all ran. And that's been shown on social media. It was like, this is the level of ridiculous. And so we've been talking a bit seriously, so I'm going to bring in a joke. How do you think our tourism ads are going? Why would I've asked friends, would you want to come here? No. Like,
no. Extreme sport tourism is a massive global industry. What could be more extreme? Come to Melbourne,
lose all your rights
by the cops, right? We we just set up this new challenge. We'll like map out this pathway. It's like orienteering, but much higher stakes.
Yeah, and every time you make it to a step or whatever, like a point, you lose a human right. And
that's right. That's right. It gets harder and harder.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so right at the end, there's a pepper spray bath, and anyway,
we've just got to pivot our tourism industry towards extreme sports, adrenaline junkies, and then we'll be right. So then what happened, because we're now literally being chased down the streets by military equipment and body armored people with shoot on sight orders, literally, like that's not that is a literal description.
That's the hunt thing. Yeah. That's
a literal description of what was happening. That's not an exaggeration. A group managed to get together somehow, despite the circumstances. They managed to actually get a critical mass together, and they marched towards a place called the Shrine of Remembrance, which is about 1.5 kilometers south of the city.
I can actually add to that because if you remember, the police asked the media to stop filming from the air with the helicopters because people like myself were watching the live stream and Sky News or whatever it was and say, the police are here. And the thing is, the police say, they're all coordinated because they know where the police are. It's like, not really. We're looking for the other so they could join up.
We were looking for each other.
It's the opposite thing where it's not like the cops here attack them. It's more the cops are there, go the other way.
That's right.
And this is they want to fight. What, by running away? It doesn't make sense. So eventually they all meet up around about Flinders Street Station, and
something
they saw
like that.
And then this is when Rukshan entered as well. And they head towards the Shrine of Remembrance, I think, because thinking it's sacred ground, freedom, as well as a big open area, so you can't get really cattle.
Let me put it this way.
And this is where you sort of joined in as well.
I was lagging behind because I got some information that the group was heading towards the Queen Victoria Market, which is the opposite end of the city.
Yes.
So I got up there and I live streamed for a while because there were cops everywhere. That's where the union headquarters is. And so they were very worried that the mob was going to come up and attack the headquarters kind of idea in their minds, right?
Yeah.
And so I responded to the intel that I got, which proved in the end to not be correct, but I don't blame the person that sent it to me. It's confusing. It's fog of war type situation, right?
Yeah.
So I've gone completely the wrong way to completely the wrong end of the city. And now I'm playing catch up to try and get to the group. So I didn't actually rendezvous with the group till after that arrived at the shrine because they just had too much of a head start on me.
Yes.
So we went there. And a lot of people got really angry about the fact that, they're bringing protest to the shrine. It's disrespectful. That's not the right place for it. Well, let me say two things. Number one, that wasn't planned. We went there in the hope that they would be forced or shamed in a way into having to extend to us the basic human decency that we should have been shown in the first place. We were chased out of the city by fully armored, body armored special operations group operators firing at us on sight.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And after that happened and they chased us around for long enough, they went, fuck it, we're going there because maybe they'll have to hold their fire in that spot. So that's number one.
Yeah.
Number two, what we are protesting about is the preservation of the freedoms that were given to us by our Anzacs.
Yeah.
We built that shrine to remember the people that gave us these freedoms. And here's what really pisses me off. On the 11th of November, they're going to have Remembrance Day. And Daniel Andrews, as the Premier of Victoria, is going to stand up and he's going to give a speech and he's going to say these words, lest we forget.
Yeah.
Now, in Australia, those are hallowed words. Those are words that we use on days like Anzac Day, on days like Remembrance Day, that we have inscripted on buildings like the Shrine of Remembrance and the War Memorial in Canberra, lest we forget. It angers me so deeply because he has forgotten. And he will stand up there and he will get the photo opportunity and he will get all the PR and everything of that. And he will use that slogan. But he has forgotten, we haven't forgotten their names, we haven't forgotten the battles, and we haven't forgotten the details about what happened, but we have completely lost touch with why and what it was that they were fighting for.
Yeah.
We have forgotten.
A third of Victorians support the government, because I think it's around, because there's I'd say there's a third that are a third angry, a third that are silent but agree. And well, you saw it on the Tuesday, we're going through the traffic where everyone's honking. Like everyone's because there's certain like the police say, oh, I'm doing it because I need to get paid. So like, well, certain people aren't protesting because they need to get paid.
That's right.
And
That's
so
right.
there's that third. But the thing is, the Daniel Andrews government would be the enemy of those Anzacs. The Anzacs would come in.
Correct.
Like, did you hear the news that Republicans in the United States actually want to put sanctions against Australia because of what they're doing? It's like, wow, we're at that level.
But so they should. Imagine the images coming out of the streets of Melbourne were coming from Moscow, or were coming from Beijing, or were coming from Hong Kong, Tiananmen Square, right? If it came out of any of those places, the politicians would be rushing to the nearest video camera to grandstand and talk about freedom and human rights.
Yeah.
Right. That's what would be happening. We absolutely deserve sanctions. 100% we do. We ought to be treated like any other state would be treated under these circumstances.
And for the watcher, viewer, listener, why would we say that? Because like really, like it's not going to affect us anymore because we're in lockdown for.
You can't destroy our economy any more than it already is.
It's like really, I don't think we're the government type will they'll lose face, but the Victorian people is like. And so what's going on?
Yeah, it's not going to get
so apparently there was one urination on the shrine.
Yeah,
and it's like
that's been blown up into something massive.
Yeah, because like a horse took a piss. Now, I mean, obviously, let's not blame the horse.
Yeah,
but that was huge.
That's right.
And it's like also they kettled in. They couldn't go to a toilet. And, but it's disrespectful. How could they? It's like I actually tweeted out. So you're upset people fighting for freedom went to a monument that celebrates people fighting for freedom. Yeah, it's like what?
There's this massive cognitive dissonance going on, and people are just caught up in their own sense of self-righteousness, their own sense of outrage, and just cannot see it. And I've given up on a lot of people, not in the sense that I've given up on having any level of friendship with them, but I'm not going to invest any energy into trying to convince them of anything.
Yeah.
It's just it's triage. They're beyond saving, so I'm not going to put any effort into saving them. I'll put my effort in relationships, into the relationships where it returns something to me and makes my life better, or where I think it's actually going to make a difference.
Yeah, being a comedian a bit cheeky, I'll just point out. So you support in Paris, you support the Nazis compared to the French underground. You support, just doing all that. It's exactly the same.
But these people will sit there and watch Star Wars and say, "Yes, I'm on the side of the rebels."
Yeah.
Oh, how awful that Emperor Palpatine just, turned the Galactic Republic into the Galactic Empire. Yep. Well, Daniel Andrews just turned a democracy into a dictatorship, and you are 100% on his side.
Yeah. That question of what would you have done in the early 30s in Germany? Well, that question's been answered now, hasn't it? Yeah.
And I'm very happy with the way that question got answered in my case.
Yeah. Same here. It's like really idiots. So let's skip to the end of where were you? Because I know you were there. You're helping at Rookshan, holding the camera. Your little
at the shrine,
your little speech. And I don't mean that in a derogatory term. A speech that was small, but that went viral, or
semi-viral. It went around a little bit.
On TikTok, because it was like, why is he wearing it? Anyway, quite good. And so I actually had to go do my regular show, Planet Collingwood. I was on air when that was happening. It's like I can't remember the exact. I think it's Monty Python in the Holy Grail, where John Cleese is running towards a castle. And it's like every shot he's further away and closer and closer, and it's like the cops they took a step when you weren't looking and get closer and closer. Now you were there when they had the minute of silence.
Yes.
Now, see, now that just shows that there's humanity involved. It's not that classic Hollywood black and white, good versus evil, because the cops actually respected that as well.
The cops joined in on that, with the exception of one radio that I think the person who was on manning that radio was at a bit of a command post a bit further back and probably wasn't aware of what was happening.
Yes.
And so there was this one annoying police radio chatter in the background, and they didn't turn it down because I don't think they realized.
Yeah.
But in terms of anyone, it's hard to hear. It is. And this is true of the police, and it's also true of the protesters. When someone tries to say something, not everyone's on the same page at the same time, but everyone that was close enough to have a clue what was going on, 100% on both sides, the police as well. And, even to the point of dipping their heads and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Because it was not just for the 2 construction workers, which the lockdown for 2 weeks, and unfortunately, I'm going to assume their gender, 2 gentlemen lost their lives. But they also, and for any other, what I liked is that young lady said, and all the other suicides in during the lockdown pandemic stuff.
Yeah, correct.
Now I shared that because it was very emotional. So like, oh my God, it's like, oh look, humanity. This is weird. We're all working together. There's still there's an element of hope, and it's not hopium. It's actual hope. Yeah. And then someone actually, then they shot them. Yeah. So let's get to
yeah, that's right. Okay, so having been involved in this since the beginning, I understand the long game, and I understand that on any given day, in any given protest, there's only so much you can achieve. Yeah. And once you've achieved that, you go home, right?
Yes. Yeah, you make a statement.
You minimize collateral damage. You minimize arrests, and that way you maintain the momentum and the energy for the next day or the next one and the one after that. The problem with this particular situation is that an enormous percentage of the crowd was made up of the unions, who had only been protesting since Monday or Friday, if you count the break rooms on the streets, right? They'd only actually been face-to-face with the cops since Monday. This is their 3rd day. And bless them, so glad to have their energy on board, but they did not, and many still do not understand the long game. There was this idea, we're not leaving until Daniel Andrews resigns or whatever. Well, listen, mate, you can stay until sunrise. Daniel Andrews is not resigning between now and sunrise. No matter how many of us stay at the shrine, it's not happening. That's not on the table. But what we had in that moment was a situation where Daniel Andrews had rolled out the anti-terror squad and an armored vehicle, and had still failed to stop us getting together and having a march.
Yeah.
He had thousands of police officers on the streets chasing us all over the city, and it still didn't work. We still got together, and we still had our march, we still had our protest. And then we arrived at the point where the police had to have a standoff with us. They had to stop coming in shooting, and they didn't even have the numbers to kettle us and completely surround us. There were still exits opportunities available.
Yes.
We had won on the ground that day. It was a comprehensive victory after he'd been on television that morning saying there's new tactics, you'd better not try it.
Yeah.
We'd humiliated him.
Yes, yeah, it's all about face in this. It's not numbers of deaths. Not a classic hot war. It's,
no.
It's about.
Yeah. We had absolutely humiliated him, and we had the opportunity where the commander on the ground said, "Listen, we're going to let everyone leave with no arrests." Now, unfortunately, that memo didn't go out to all of the officers. So some in the surrounding areas, some people still, even the ones that did take the offer, still did get arrested and harassed. Yeah. So that's unfortunate. However, the offer was made. We're going to let you all go. We don't want to have to clear you off the monument by shooting, and have that imagery going around the world. And so I'm sitting there going, okay, what do we achieve by staying? Right now we're winning. The only thing that happens is we force the cops to come onto the shrine and shoot people. Okay. Now that's terrible imaging for them. I agree, but it's also terrible imaging for us.
Yes.
And it's something that I don't want to see happen. That's not the place, Yeah. Yes, we went there as a last resort, a little bit like a soldier resorting to a church in World War II or something like that. You're just saying, I'm coming here because I hope they're going to have to treat me with a little bit more humanity than what they would if they caught me on the street outside. Yeah. It had served that purpose without being disrespected up to that point in time. And let's not disrespect it by forcing the cops, because they will give the order and they will be made to do it.
Yeah.
So I got on the megaphone along with a number of others and said, listen, guys, let's go home. The problem is, what unionist knows who I am? Who the hell am I?
Right? Plus 3 days of anger. They're still in that
3 days of anger and everything else. Yeah. So I couldn't give a rousing speech, because a rousing speech was a really bad idea when the crowd was already as fired up as it was. And so I was kind of a little bit trapped. I'm like, they don't know who I am. I can't show them who I am and what I'm capable of. I just have to kind of stand up and meekly go, hey guys, I think it's a really good time to go home, which I did. And a number of people did then leave, but unfortunately a number of people stayed. and the inevitable happened. I mean, what else? How else was this going to end? It wasn't going to end any other way.
No.
The police came onto the shrine. They began shooting their rubber bullets and their pepper balls and everything else, and basically went back to what we had seen at the start of the day. And so sadly, the day finished where it started. Instead of finishing with a ceasefire, we were back to shoot on sight type of scenario.
Back the massive loop. It's interesting as well because the next day, because just the propaganda from it, like the Murdoch riots and far left, and like what fantasy world are you in? Like someone on my Facebook, I don't know why we're friends, but I use it as a teaching lesson, if that makes sense. It's like, I can see what they're doing. But the meme was the Murdoch riots have fizzled out and Dan Andrews has a popularity of 64%. I told my mum that and she's gone, I'm sure there's 64 people that like him. It's like, this is where I get my humor from.
That sounds more right.
Now, so we had the all the curfews and everything else like that. On the Wednesday they tried to stop media filming the protests. They lost in court. So the police / government were trying to censor the media. Correct. Now on Thursday, what are your knowledge of that? Because it looks like the CBD was shut down electronically on certain aspects. I also want to add, after seeing the cops shoot at the shrine, I don't think many people wanted to protest after 3 days and seeing that as well.
That's right. So a lot of people were exhausted. There was to my knowledge, there was no time or place released as a meeting point. And if you can't get about 2,000 people is your minimum number of people to have any measure of safety. Once you've got about 2,000 people, the police will set up rather than going and shooting you, right? Anything less than that, you're at extremely high risk of just immediate violence as soon as, shoot on sight type of stuff. And so if you can't get a group together, and how could they with the amount of police presence and everything else, it did appear that Telstra was complicit in shutting down or slowing down its network, and or Facebook did something. There were a lot of people trying to stream and they were unable to. And I've spoken to a few people who were there and were trying to stream and were unable to. So Thursday fizzled. Okay. I don't think it's a fizzle when an unarmed populace has trouble gathering when an armed police force will shoot them on sight.
Well, see, this is their wording. I think it's like, long game. You can't hit every day. We're not French. And that's a lovely acknowledgement. Joseph Paul Watson, if you're familiar with him, we're called the Orange Vest thing, because he's still more orange because the yellow vest is in France.
Yellow vest is France.
And so as a joke, I just the battle of the shrine. Thursday was a day off, which makes sense.
It was an RDO.
RDO. And then Friday was a public holiday in a lockdown. Thanks, Dan. What's the thing? Oh no, things are closed. But they stayed away from the city, and you had the Battle of Northcote.
Yes.
Which was only, I think, 90 to 100 people or something like that.
A very small skirmish, and the police embarrassed themselves because their presence in the suburbs was so out of place that locals ended up gathering, and they had ended up cordoning off actually a fairly popular shop where there is allowed to be open for takeaway, and people would show up to get takeaway, and there's all these riot police in between them and the shop. Hundreds. And they ended up almost creating a protest because the public started to go, well, what is this? Like, what's this overkill? This is ridiculous. And starting to mouth off at the cops. People who would never have shown up to a protest were starting to have remonstrations with the cops because they were in their community. So it was quite a pretty thing to see, actually, as far as I was concerned. I've got to fast forward a little bit here because I need to go shortly, but we then had Saturday, I attempted to join what happened on Saturday, but I was not able to get to the right place at the right time.
That was St Kilda, wasn't it?
That ended up in St Kilda. No, sorry. I attempted to join Friday. And I was not able to get in. I played Dodge and Cops in the city for a while. Unfortunately, I'm relatively recognizable, so I can't get too close to the cops or take any risks. And I was never able to link up with anybody. And then by the time I found out about the Northcote thing, I was already halfway home, and I live an hour out of the city. So I missed out on Friday. Saturday, I chose not to go in. And yes, they went to St Kilda. They didn't get large numbers, and they were pretty quickly pounced on by the police. And we didn't get a lot of media cover or a lot of sort of social media content out of that, because that's really where the war is. Okay, the war is actually happening online. It's happening on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok. That's actually where it's going on. Then we come to today, which is Monday.
Yeah, because Sunday's the Lord's Day.
Yeah, that's right. No, nothing really happened on Sunday that I'm aware of, anyway.
Yeah, and then we'll end here, not right now, but with what the latest one in the Battle of Fitzroy. See, I just like saying it. But anyway, were you there, or you just?
No. So I was aware that it was happening first, but unfortunately, again, it's a weekday, and I can't leave the kids.
Yes, but you shared enough on your page.
So I made sure that the people who were going to be there were going to take photographs and supply them to me, so that I could push them out and make sure that we didn't have the problem that we had on Saturday, where there just wasn't a lot of content going out. Right?
Yes.
So they sent me videos, they sent me photos, I posted them straight away, and they've gone kind of gangbusters on Instagram and on Facebook. And so just making sure people know that it happened, because it was a beautiful protest. They did it so well.
Oh yes, it's the silent. It's good. They're all social distance. They're wearing masks. They're all sitting down. They're all just wearing completely silent. I know Avi and Rebel News were there as well, and Rukshan turned up.
Rukshan was there.
Strangely enough, I tried to watch his video through my my desktop, and Facebook wouldn't allow me to watch the video. But then I did it on my. It kept sort of just stopping. But then I watched it on my phone, and hey presto.
No, interesting.
So that's the latest. Now this is healthcare workers. Now I don't know if you saw Daniel Andrews get a question. Are you familiar with the basketballer Andrew Bogut?
Yep.
Yeah. You should get him on one of your shows.
I would love to, but I don't have a direct contact with him. So all I can do is send him a message on Instagram, and he'd
he's also on Twitter as well. So I mean, put it out there and see because I think it would work well. Someone actually asked him, Mr. Premier, are you familiar with so-called health workers doing a protest? And I'm like, that's a bit insulting.
Yeah, the meme has already been decided as far as they're concerned.
And then I haven't been what's the word? I haven't been appraised on that. I'm saying the wrong word. You know, he hasn't been told about it. I can't remember the exact word he said. But so I can't comment, and then he spent the next minute commenting on it. But it's Daniel Andrews.
Yeah, and there's people who are just so deeply delusional. I've seen people dismissing it on the basis that vets can also get the same uniforms, and so it was probably a bunch of veterinarians. And I'm like,
what's the difference?
One, what's the difference? Two, really? You think there's a whole bunch of veterinarians are going to go out there and risk being arrested in order to pretend to be healthcare workers to protest about the healthcare vaccine? Like,
it's like Bill Shorten, where like some idiots just went to the reject shop and bought some high vis. It's like the stores that are closed because of lockdown.
That's right. You know, and I the jacket that I wore when I was there, I was trying to blend in. Yes, I was, but it's a legitimate jacket that I own from when I was a forklift driver.
Yeah.
All right. And people are like, oh, he dressed up as a tradie. No, I dressed up as myself, wearing my work clothes from about 12 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I dressed up as.
Yeah. Fake tradies. It's like, what's that got to do with pro-choice? Yeah. But there was
no time that I ever claimed to be a tradie.
Yeah, exactly.
You can only be a fake something if you're claiming to be that thing, and I never did.
Yeah, which is the media's projecting.
Yeah.
The one nurse that was that Arby spoke to, and I think Rukshan actually did interview, but my video sucked.
Yeah.
She's for science. She's for vaccines. She works at a vaccine hub. However, she had the placard, coercion is not consent. Yes. And it's basically all about 100%. Pro-choice and allowing people 100%. To have the freedom to think. And that's what they don't understand. It's not complicated. That's not what they understand.
Yeah.
So for those who are asking what's going on in Melbourne, I think we covered it.
So that's pretty much brought you up to the minute, literally to this morning.
Yeah.
We've covered it. So in the end, what happened was the police showed up in massive numbers, and the images of all of these riot police in body armor with weapons standing around these nurses in nurses' outfits, holding signs, sitting on the grass silently, is pretty striking. And the helicopter overhead, and like this whole, apparently 4 buses and about 10 police cars plus a few other equipment vehicles showed up to this small group of nurses, and they were basically told, if you disperse now, we won't fuck you up. It was basically what it came down to. And they chose to disperse. I'm not going to criticize that decision.
No, they made their point.
That's their decision to make on the ground at the time, whether they want to sit there and get arrested or whether they want to leave. I always choose to leave if I can. So I'm certainly not going to criticize them for choosing to leave as well. However, once again, they won. They achieved it. The images are going around the world right now. The videos are going around the world.
Because the media, I don't think they'll cover it at all, or it'll be just a small, and some people thing in a park. Coming up next.
I think they'll have to, because of people like Rukshan.
Yeah.
I actually think they won't be able to sweep this stuff under the rug. If Rukshan or Avi, I think they feel like they can ignore a little bit more. No disrespect to him, but I think the media think they can ignore him a little bit more. Rukshan, when you've got the crowds chanting this guy's name and he's getting a viewership 20, 30 times bigger than the mainstream media, they can't just pretend it didn't happen.
Getting interviewed on Fox News.
Yeah, correct. They can't just pretend that it didn't happen if he covered it.
So in the final moments of this show, what can people now? I know we're talking to Victorians. However, I'm sharing this with everyone else because they can learn from our experience where you don't want to turn into us. So what can, because you've got a great tagline, which makes sense because, slavery, Jewish Holocaust, all this other stuff. Well, see, I haven't said it yet. I'm leaving it for you.
Good people break bad laws.
Yeah.
You cannot obey bad laws and still claim to be a good person. It doesn't work that way.
Well, the police, I'm getting paid. It's like, you're a mercenary. And remember the Nuremberg trials? Saying I was following orders is not an excuse.
Not a defense. It's not a defense.
I think, that's actually in the charter. Is like, you can refuse an order if it's unethical.
I don't know how the police are trained anymore. When I was in the Army Reserves, it was very clear, it was drilled into us from recruit course that we are morally responsible for the orders that we follow. And you have a moral responsibility to refuse if you believe an order is wrong. You'll get court-martialed and all the rest of it. You'll have to go through a pretty unpleasant process. However, if your convictions tell you that you can't follow an order, then that's actually what you are obliged to do. And we were trained that way. I don't believe that happens in the Victoria Police anymore. No. Or if it ever did, I wasn't in VicPol. But talking to some of the older members, I do believe that they at least had that as an ethos, whether it was official or not, that was their ethos. Now, talking to current members and particularly relatively new recruits, I've actually had some of them get mad at me for suggesting that they are still morally responsible, even if they're following orders. And I had one of them even say to me, no, it's a common misconception that we work for the people of Victoria. We don't. We work for the government of Victoria.
And the government represents the Victorian people, but No.
It's just a case of we work for the government and we do what the government tells us to do. And that's the right thing. That's the moral thing. I do as I'm told by the government. And that completely made sense in this particular, they're a very new officer and this completely made sense in their mind. And they accepted, they rejected and got upset that I would suggest that they would still bear moral responsibility for their actions when they're in uniform.
I think we need to teach history in school again.
And well, look, this person's old enough to know better, but they've had another career and then they've moved into policing, and they're old enough to know better.
Yes.
But this is just unfortunately the state of things. So to answer your question, what can other people do around the world to avoid this? Number one, get more people to understand what's happened here. Right. We are the cautionary tale. I used to talk about Venezuela being the cautionary tale of our generation against socialism, right? The collapse of Venezuela from being among the top 10 wealthiest countries in the world to being among the poorest was the cautionary tale of my generation. Well, we've now become the cautionary tale of the police state, and the fact that even a liberal democracy is not immune from becoming a police state.
Yeah, and it's also Oz style. Have you noticed? Because you lost all your guns. It's like, we still have guns. I haven't seen any. But it's our culture, and so it's that's why it's so apparent and unrestrained of police shooting at unarmed civilians.
Correct.
It's like, mate, what are you doing? What are you doing, mate?
And there's this absolutely absurd thing that happens. I've seen Commissioner Luke Cornelius say it. I've seen Commissioner Shane Patton say it, where they're defending some of these police overreactions on the basis that it's a very fast-moving and frightening environment for our operators, our officers to be operating in. And I'm like, well, fuck me. How fast-moving and frightening do you think it is for the unarmed protesters that are facing off with your armed officers that are wearing body armor and helmets and face shields and are shooting?
Oh, and I just twist that, like, for who are trying to get away from.
Yes. Well, once we get trapped, once we get trapped, we're facing off, right? But up until that point, absolutely, that's a good correction. We are literally trying to keep our distance, and they're the ones chasing us.
We just being I'm joining your brother. Just joining. It's just to be heard. And it's very hard to have a conversation because, you know, the people think that there's the Black Plague out there, but the numbers and everything else like that. But that's another conversation.
That's another. Look,
I'll let you go because you have a life.
I need to call it. I can hear a crying baby, so I need to go and
so
attend to that.
Just quickly allow people where they can find you if they choose to follow.
Facebook, my page name is Topher Field, TOPHERFIELD. Same on Instagram at Topher Field, and also do make sure you go to topherfield.net and put your email address in, because if I get removed from socials, that email list is how I'll be able to keep in touch with you.
Yep, a lot of other people are doing that. Thank you, Topher Field, for joining, and we'll probably do this again. And because I enjoyed this, even though it's all this dark stuff, it's still fun. So everyone watching on the YouTubes and the Odysseys and everything else like that, please like, subscribe, share. If anyone asks what's happening in Australia or Victoria, you can point them to this show, and hopefully that will help out. So until next time, kids, we'll see you soon.
Cheers.